now the mic is on. Amazing. I'm just loud anyway. Thank you. We are really appreciative and gratified to have Eva Wiener here to be able to share her story with us today. So I'm going to turn it over to her, and there will be time for some questions after she finishes speaking, and then after that we'll have a little memorial service in honor of Yom Hashoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day, which was this week on Monday. So Eva, just make sure, is your mic muted still, or is it on?
Am I on?
Yes.
You can hear me. I don't have to shout. I'm used to shouting. I have kids. For most of my life, I did not consider myself a Holocaust survivor because I didn't have any of the symbols that signify a Holocaust survivor. I didn't have a number on my arm. I was not in a concentration camp. I didn't have all the earmarks that would have classified me that way. But eventually, because of my background, I changed my status. And I hope you'll agree with me when I'm finished that I had a right to do that. Both my parents were born in Poland. And in the early 1900s, there was something called pogroms, which were uprisings against the Jewish population by the government. And life in Poland for the Jewish population became very difficult. So both my mother and my father, respectively as children, their families decided to leave Poland and look for a safer place. They both ended up in Berlin, Germany. Now, Berlin was a very, very sophisticated city, very modern at the time, lots of theaters and lots of universities and museums. It was a beautiful city and very welcoming. Both my parents were able to go to public school. And they were well educated. My father went to public school as well as to yeshiva. And both my parents were very observant. But then something happened in 1933 called the Nuremberg Laws. These were some 400 laws that were enacted by the government against the Jewish population. And then a man by the name of Adolf Hitler was selected, I can't say elected, as Chancellor of Germany. And his philosophy was that the Jewish population was infiltrating the German population, and the Jews were nothing but vermin. So all these laws against the Jews at the time made it laws that lawyers and doctors were not permitted to treat anyone other than Jewish patients and customers. Jewish children were no longer allowed to go to public school. Jewish businesses were not allowed to deal with anybody other than the Jewish customers. My father's family, and he was one of 8 children, built a beautiful, very successful kosher bakery in Berlin. And all 8 kids worked in the bakery, and that's basically what it was at that time. Families ran the family business. My mother, when she graduated high school, was taught by a very sophisticated woman to be a dressmaker for the wealthy women. You didn't buy clothes off the rack like at Lord & Taylor. Either you made your own clothes or somebody made them for you. And my mother was a very talented dressmaker. By the time my parents met, life in Germany for the Jewish population had become a nightmare. My father's brother, 3 sisters, and his parents, that's my grandparents and my aunts and uncle, left Berlin and went to Palestine long before it was the State of Israel. They saw that life in Germany was not welcoming, and they decided to leave. Then something happened in November of 1938 called Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass. And the reason it's called that is because the military and the police and the marched through the streets and smashed the windows of all the Jewish-owned properties, all the Jewish-owned businesses, and went into the synagogues, burned the holy books, burned the Torah, and that was basically the day that World War II began. The following day, my father was taken out of the apartment and put on a train with hundreds of other men and sent back to Poland. They were sending these men back to what they call the country of origin, because my father was born in Poland. He and all these men were being sent back to Poland, and he found himself in the capital of Poland, in Warsaw, sharing a one-bedroom apartment with 12 other men. That wasn't the problem. The problem was he had left his wife, my mother, and his baby, and that was me, back in Berlin, and he didn't know what our fate was going to be. He didn't know what was going to happen to us. My mother and her two sisters found out that if they could get a visa to another country. Now, the visa, this is not like MasterCard Visa. This is a visa, which is a piece of paper issued by a country that allows you to enter that country. She found out if she could get a visa to another country, my father would be able to come back from Poland to join us, to leave Germany. So she and her two sisters started standing on lines of every embassy or every consulate that was in Berlin, sometimes days on end, begging, pleading with any country that would issue us a visa. My mother got a visa to a place called Siam. You probably have never heard of Siam, except maybe the king of. It's now the country of Thailand. She was delighted because now she had a way of showing that she had a place to go and was able to leave Germany. So that she registered the visa at the authority, and then my father was able to make his way back from Warsaw to Berlin on the condition that we leave Germany immediately. My mother's brother had also been very unhappy in Germany, and he had gone to Havana, Cuba. So my mother sent him money and asked him maybe if he could buy a visa to Cuba. While my father was traveling back from Warsaw to Berlin, the visa for Cuba came. Well, it wasn't a difficult decision to make. Going to Siam, what's called a third world country where they didn't even have indoor plumbing, or going to a place like Havana, Cuba, that not only was modern, a destination paradise type island, had my uncle there, we had family, and it was only 90 miles away from America, which was the ultimate goal. Not a difficult decision to make. My mother chose Cuba over Siam. She was able to book passage on a ship called the SS St. Louis. It was owned by the Hamburg America line out of Hamburg, Germany. My father finally made his way back from Warsaw to Berlin, packed what few things they were permitted to take. Couldn't take a lot of money, only one suitcase per person. We got on a train in Berlin and headed to Hamburg. Got to the dock, gorgeous, magnificent cruise ship is docked there. And there were flags flying, banners flying, a band playing, a photographer running around taking pictures of everybody. Very, very festive. There were 937 Jewish passengers leaving the horrific conditions in Germany and boarding this beautiful cruise ship headed for a paradise island of Havana, Cuba. Many of the passengers had what was called quota numbers to enter the United States. At the time, there was a law that only a certain amount of people from each country in the world were permitted to enter America. And you had to apply for a number. But your number didn't give you any guarantees. You might wait a month, a year, possibly even 5 years. It was like a lottery. So you never knew when your number would come up or when you would be permitted to enter America. But we were on this beautiful cruise ship, headed to Havana, Cuba, and it was beautiful. We had dances and parties and shuffleboard and a swimming pool on deck, and it was beautiful. We were treated royally. And if any of you have ever been on a cruise, you know that you are treated royally. And the food is wonderful and the entertainment is beautiful. As a matter of fact, one of the salons was made clean. Adolf Hitler's picture was on the wall, and the captain took it down and made the salon a synagogue for those people who wanted to daven and pray. And it was a lovely voyage. So we get to Havana Harbor, but we can't dock. The captain drops the anchor. We're all ready to leave the ship. We're all packed, ready to go. Nobody knows what's happening. Now I'll give you the background to what actually was going on backstage. Adolf Hitler, the Chancellor of Germany and the head of the Nazi Party, had actually emphatically stated that he wants to get rid of the Jewish population, and he's going to put them on luxury liners and send them around the world, and watch, no one's going to want them. He had put his agents as advisors to the president of Cuba, President Brew, who was a very corrupt man anyway. But his agents, Hitler's agents, had told him that he will not recognize our papers. We had what we thought were valid papers issued by a man who was President Brew's arch enemy, who had pocketed all the money that we paid for these very expensive visas. And President Brew was not happy. So he took the advice of these Nazi agents and declared our papers to be worthless and would not recognize them as valid. Therefore, the 20-some-odd people that had papers issued by another person were permitted to leave the ship and go to the harbor. But we were not, because our papers had now been declared worthless and unrecognized. We had even paid round-trip fare for our trips to Cuba, and that's what was demanded by the Honda America line, knowing that we had no intentions of coming back. Now we're sitting in the harbor, and the Captain gets all dressed up and he goes on this little boat and he goes to the dock. And he comes back, and then some people that look very important come to the ship, and there's all this conferencing going on. But nobody knows what's happening. Finally, the captain announced that we were not going to be permitted to land in Cuba. Lots of negotiations going on. One organization offered any country in the world a per head per capita. At that time, it was $500, which doesn't sound like a lot of money, but $500 today would be more like $25,000. Offered any country that money for each passenger that a country would take. President Brew was not happy. He said, I don't want your money. I just don't want your cargo. And we were made to look like unwanted cargo. The captain said, we're only 90 miles away from America. Surely they'll let us land there. So he turned the ship around and headed towards Miami. After all, it's only 90 miles. My dad used to say, we got so close to Miami that you could almost read the license plates on Ocean Avenue on the taxis. That's how close we were to Miami, in the sight of all those beautiful palm trees and hotels. But the minute we got that close, the Coast Guard came out and threw us out of American waters. They said we are trespassing. They would not allow us to dock in America. And the telegrams that were sent to President Franklin Roosevelt were not even answered, begging and pleading for us to be allowed to dock in America. The captain was not a member of the Nazi Party. He did not agree with their philosophy. He wanted his passengers to be treated as any other cruise passengers would be. He wanted us treated with dignity. As a matter of fact, there were several agents of the Nazi Party that had been assigned to the ship. When the captain found out, he put them in what's called the brig, or the jail, in the hull of the ship. And he promised that he would find safe haven for his passengers. At this point, the Jewish Agency had become involved. They were contacting every country in the world, including South America and Canada, many countries in Europe, trying desperately to find a place for our ship to dock. But the captain had no choice. He had to turn the ship back to Europe, back across the Atlantic. While we were traveling, 4 countries agreed to take some of the passengers. Belgium, Holland, France, and England agreed to take some passengers. Now, no one country agreed to take them all. We were only 900 people. It's not as if we would overwhelm any country. But no country said, I'll take them all. My father, who was an extremely wise man, requested to be put on the list for England. And years later, I asked him, why did you choose England? Because when the ship docked in Europe, it docked in Antwerp, Belgium. And his sister and her husband and their baby were on the dock to greet us. So we had family in Belgium. I said, why didn't you choose Belgium? His idea was to be as far away from Germany as possible and England was the furthest, and he was hoping that the English Channel would be a buffer between continental Europe and England. How wise he was, not even knowing that that would have been, or was, the safest place to be. We knew no one in England, but thank goodness we were permitted to be put on the list for England. When we docked in Antwerp, a little tender, a little boat took most of us to England and eventually to London. My parents and I spent the entire war in London. And most of that time, because soon after we got there, Germany decided to bomb London, we spent many nights in bomb shelters. I'll describe a bomb shelter to you, about the size of this section here. And there was a long table down the middle and benches around the periphery, 6 feet of brick below ground and 6 feet of brick above ground. Really didn't keep you safe from anything but debris from fallen homes around you. A direct hit would not have helped at all. But we, as a community, it was built for 50 people, but you squeezed in 100 people, or 150 sometimes, like sardines in a can. Anybody that wanted safety would try to get into a shelter. Now, my father, being a baker, would bake all night and come home in the morning and sometimes not find us in the shelter because the shelter was evacuated, and spent the entire day looking for where we had been transferred. And life in London was difficult, but I cannot possibly compare it to what it would have been had we gone to Belgium, Holland, or France, because so many of the passengers that went to those 3 countries did not survive the war. I lived in London for the entire war, and 1 year after, my parents and I were able to sail from England to New York. Finally, our immigration numbers finally came up. And we docked in Manhattan on Memorial Day weekend. Unfortunately, there was a dock strike. We weren't allowed to get off the ship. It was a little frightening. You see, if the dock strike, the men who work on the dock couldn't take your luggage out, and we weren't allowed to leave the ship. But fortunately, the strike was over after the weekend, and we were able to get off the ship. But while we were on, it was pretty scary, because we remembered what happened in Cuba. That first summer, since it was already June, too late to register me for school, my mother's sister, who had settled in Belmar, New Jersey, she had left Berlin before we did. So we spent that first summer in Belmar. I learned to swim, beautiful Atlantic Ocean, had a wonderful time in Belmar, and ended up marrying a man from Belmar. So that's why I live in the Jersey Shore. That's basically my story. I've left a lot of loopholes, and I hope you have a lot of questions. But now I will justify why I now consider myself a survivor. Hitler had foretold that he wanted to get rid of the Jewish population because they were called Untermenschen, subhuman, as opposed to Übermenschen, superior people in the German race. Jews were vermin. Jews had to be exterminated. he predicted this ship's voyage, and he made it certain that no country would accept us, to show the world that he was going to do what the world really wanted, to eliminate the Jewish population. And that became what was known as the final solution. This ship that my parents and I were on was actually a foretold story to what the German Nazi Party's ambition was, to eliminate Jews. This ship became a symbol for refugees throughout the world, and is today still that kind of a symbol. Nobody wanted this unwanted cargo. Even asked to take passengers and pay the country per passenger did not entice enough countries to take up that banner. This ship was perpetuated by hate and bigotry, anti-Semitism, prejudice, all things that made this ship a symbol even for today. I usually leave my students, and I'll do it for all of you now, with a homework assignment. I know nobody likes homework. But this homework assignment doesn't have to be completed for about 20 years. We survivors are not going to be here much longer by virtue of our age. I'm an old lady. And it is your assignment to tell the story of the Holocaust to your children and grandchildren and everyone. Because if we don't, if we allow hate and bigotry, prejudice, anti-Semitism to fester and grow without stop, we, God forbid, will see another genocide and another Holocaust. And genocides are happening even as we speak today. Genocides in Rwanda, Cambodia, and other places around the world where people are chosen just because they're different to be eliminated or harassed. You live in the greatest country in the world, where not only are you permitted, but you're encouraged to speak up against injustice. It is your responsibility to speak up where you see these things and stand up against any prejudices. Do I have your promise to fulfill the assignment? Thank you. I'm going to stop here and hope that you have many questions and fill in some of my blanks. Thank you.
So if anyone, very loud. If anyone has a question, just raise your hand and I'll come around so we can
The first one is always the hardest.
We're talking about the early to mid 30s here, and we didn't have the communication systems that we have today. How did your mother get word to your father to come back from Berlin? I was just curious. I'm sorry, to come back from Warsaw to Berlin.
A letter, no telephone. And it took time. By the time he came back from Warsaw to Berlin, a lot of time had elapsed as well. we did not leave Germany until May of 1939, so that a lot of things transpired between the time he left Warsaw and the time he came back to Berlin and the time we were able to leave.
How old were you when you were on the ship?
Good question. I was 10 months old when my mother carried me aboard. And of course, I have no memory of the ship itself. But I was fortunate in the fact that my parents shared with me their story. But I never knew what significance it had. To me, it was just part of my background, how we got here, why we did what we did, and my parents were very sharing. So basically what I'm doing is telling you my parents' story.
What happened to your grandparents and your parents' siblings?
My father's brother and his 3 sisters and my grandparents were safe in Palestine and were able to make. Actually, my grandfather built a bakery in a town called Ranana, and I have much family still in that town, although the bakery is gone. But I have a huge family, the descendants of all those uncles and aunts in Israel, and grateful for that. My mother's brother, who had gone to Cuba, left Cuba during the war and came to New York. My mother's 2 sisters, one settled in Belmar, New Jersey, as I said, and the other sister settled in Astoria, New York. My father, when we came to America, found it was easier for him to earn a living in Astoria, New York, because he did not work on Shabbat, than in Belmar, New Jersey. So that's where I was raised, in Astoria, but came to the shore with my wonderful husband, who was living here. Now, 3 of his sisters did not survive the war.
What happened to the sister in Belgium?
The sister in Belgium, she, her husband, and her baby were taken to Auschwitz, the concentration camp, and perished there.
If you were to go to Thailand in the beginning, or current day Thailand, would it have been easier and faster than you have done before?
You're talking about Siam? I don't know. It's a guess. Chances are we would have waited in Siam for our number and still not been able to come to America until our lottery number came up.
How long were you on the ship altogether? How long were you on the ship altogether?
4 weeks.
4?
From
From going to Cuba, then after that, that's what he wants to know
okay,
total.
we left May 13th, and we got to Antwerp, I think it was June 20th, thereabouts. So it was 4 weeks on the ship itself. Down front.
Did you ever hear officially, either you or your parents, like an explanation as to why the U.S., refused the ship? And later on, did anyone official, I don't know, like apologize or give an explanation to your parents or the people who had been on the ship?
That's a good question. After many years, research has been done on what the political issues were at the time in Roosevelt's administration. And I won't go into it. It's a long explanation. Yes, the United States, 70 years later, wrote a resolution, and I fortunately was able to be there in Washington, D.C. that year at the apology that was written by, at the time, Clinton, yeah, forgot her first name.
Bill Clinton?
Hillary, thank you.
No.
Hillary Clinton had drafted a resolution that was written by her, that was recorded by her associate, and then presented to us. A thank you and an apology. The more powerful apology that we received, and this pin was issued by the government of Canada, and Justin Trudeau invited St. Louis survivors to a beautiful presentation in Parliament, a half-hour speech that he made with not a dry eye in the House, and presented us personally with a pin, apologizing for his government's not allowing us in 39 and welcoming us in 85, I think it was. I'm not sure of the date. But both governments have apologized for not allowing us entry. Should we accept the apology? That's an individual decision.
Eva, your story was very emotional and beautifully said. Thank you very much. My question is, here you're praising America, as we all do, but how did your parents actually feel America not accepting the Jewish people, and how were you able to get along knowing when you did come here?
They were resentful, obviously, for not having been permitted in. But my mother, having two sisters here, was a draw. She didn't know her in-laws because they had all left Germany before she was married. But when we came, it was a relief. Not only were we coming to family, but America was very different in 1946 than it was in 1939. So that was, I think, the calming atmosphere that my parents felt when they finally did come. And I appreciated it mostly because it gave me the opportunity not only to observe Judaism in freedom, but be educated, have a good job. My last job, believe it or not, was a way of thanking America. I was a budget analyst at Fort Monmouth for the United States Department of Defense. So that I felt that this was my way of paying back for finally being able to come here and live a life of freedom. And I knew what it meant to be free, more so than my fellow students or fellow workers. And that was my minimal way of saying thank you.
Did you ever get taken to a concentration camp?
I didn't hear the question.
What? Did you ever get taken to a concentration camp?
No, thank God.
Have you visited any since?
No, I haven't. I have not been able to do that. I was invited back to Berlin. The city of Berlin did a program where they invited former Berlin-born people to apologize for forcing us to leave. I didn't want to go at first, but I got talked into it. So my husband and I did go. And we were treated royally within the group that we were with. We were about 90 of us. But the tragedy was that when my husband and I went out on our own, and I still speak German, I was not a foreigner at this point, tried to interact with some of the residents and found anti-Semitism very, very strong. How long ago was that? 2007. But I want to say this. The government does not recognize anti-Semitism and does try to fight against it. But unfortunately, within the populace, at least in Berlin, I found it to be present. Example, I wanted to visit my grandfather's grave, which is in the largest Jewish cemetery in Europe. We tried to get a taxi cab. The taxis, when they heard where I wanted to go, refused to take me. The people who worked in the office of the Jewish cemetery were totally abusive. I had a terrible interaction with them, and that spoiled the trip. I have since been invited to Cuba and was treated royally by everyone. They truly understood what the significance of the ship was and were apologetic. And I felt no anti-Semitism at all in Cuba. It was a big change, big difference.
I want to make more of a statement to you than a question. I'm privileged to be one of the teachers here. A Jew is a Jew regardless of how observant you are. So a survivor is a survivor, and we thank you for being here. And the biggest word I think is that we use is indifference, and your homework assignment to make sure that all of our students here and their parents, we don't show any indifference, and make sure that we all remember and it doesn't happen again, because we do see what's going on in the world, and we want to make sure that anti-Semitism becomes a thing of the past. So thank you for being here, and you are a survivor.
Thank you. There's one question that I'm surprised nobody asked. What happened to the captain? Here was a man, my mother called him our savior. He did not agree with the Nazi philosophy, and he was determined to save the ship. Not just the ship, but the passengers. He promised that on the way back to Europe, if no country would take us, he would beach the ship in Scotland and set it ablaze, if necessary, to save the passengers. One man, convinced that this is a wrong, would stand up. It's all it takes. One man would have saved everybody if we were in danger. So all of you have the responsibility to stand up and vocalize any injustice. Even bullying, even as simple as that, has to be controlled. The captain, unfortunately, they took his commission away, and he lived the entire war in poverty. And when the St. Louis passengers heard about that, we supported him for the rest of his life. And he is recognized in Jerusalem at Yad Vashem as a righteous among the nations. And I had the privilege to honoring him along with 5 other survivors at Yad Vashem and thank him. We presented his cap to Yad Vashem as a memorial to him and what he did.
Did you ever meet Steven Spielberg?
My father was interviewed by the Shoah Foundation. but I've not met Stephen person. The most famous person I met was, what's her name? From the film, Faye Dunaway. She and I shared a stage at the premiere of the movie Voyage of the Damned. That's the most famous person. A couple other people. Zero Mostel. I have a picture with, names drive me nuts. The Israeli, the Jewish guitarist, singer, gone about 10 years now. It'll come to me.
Can you talk about your journey to classifying yourself as a Holocaust survivor, and what do you think the definition is? Or who else would qualify?
According to the new interpretation of Holocaust survivors, is anyone who was born in Europe between certain dates and survived any kind of injustice, problems, whatever, escaping, is considered a survivor. What happened was a book called Voyage of the Damned was in the process of being written by two authors in London. And an ad in one of the German Jewish newspapers that my father used to read asked for survivors of the St. Louis. And we wrote to him, giving our testimony as well for the book. And then when the movie came out, I was invited to the premiere in New York with my parents. That's where I shared the stage with Faye Dunaway. She is in the film. The movie is a wonderful Hollywoodized interpretation of the book, but it gives a good perspective of what the situation happened and some of the background information of the voyage. After that showing, I realized that I was a part of history that could inform the next generation of the tragedy of the Holocaust. And that's when I started to speak.
Did your parents keep in contact with the people on the ship after they were, whatever country they wound up living in?
Not at all. The only contact came shortly after the movie was released. An organization in Florida called the St. Louis Legacy Organization had a reunion of survivors in Fort Lauderdale, which unfortunately I could not attend at the time. But we've had reunions since then. One of them when the resolution was presented to us in Washington, the one in Canada, and we've had several reunions since. And there is a documentary that talks about Roosevelt's administration and the ship and has been shown all over the world. After the showing of the movie, we usually have a Q&A with several survivors. And the only good thing that's come out of COVID is that I've done Zoom programs all over the world with Complicit, the documentary. I was in Johannesburg, South Africa. I was in Belgium, in Denmark, in London, and no jet lag. So that it's given me the opportunity to reach larger audiences. So thank goodness for Zoom. Not for COVID, but for Zoom.
Again, thank you on behalf of everyone. I work at the temple as well, and we're very, very grateful for you and your story. I was wondering, and I didn't know if I missed it when I stepped out, but have you been in touch with or were able to meet or speak with any other people that were children also on that ship and that are around your age now? Like, was there any kind of organization or, something like that so that you all would be able to meet each other again or anything
Yes,
like that?
I'm very fortunate. Of course, they were all children now. The adults are not here anymore. The oldest survivor, I spent 2 days with him in Washington, D.C. this past week. He is 98. And thank God, Baruch Hashem, he is still with it and wonderful and has a conscious recollection. He was 14 years old on the ship. So he has a personal message of how he got there and what have you, and knows it personally. The other survivor that was with us in Washington, D.C. Is 85, same age as I am. Well, no, 80, he's 87, I'm sorry. But he doesn't have much memory. His story is quite different because he was not from Germany. He was from Czechoslovakia. And he fortunately was able to leave the country that he went to and went to Ecuador and spent the war in Ecuador. But he was on the ship as well. I am in touch with several other survivors who were my age and a little bit older. And we've had reunions. We try to stay in touch as much as possible, having had the same types of experience. And yet each survivor, their survival experience is very different. I just received, unfortunately, the notice of one of two sisters that passed who stayed in England. And she just died in Manchester at age 94. But her sister is 92 and still lives in Manchester, England. But we're in touch, which is wonderful.
I'll come back in 1 second.
It's amazing how complete your story is, and from a young age, how you were able to take as much as you were and put it all together. Were there, while speaking with your people that were similar, had similar experiences, were they able to fill in any of the gaps for you, or was there anything that they knew that you've learned recently that you didn't know prior?
Yes, there is a wonderful book that was published by two people who worked for the Holocaust Museum in D.C. They wrote a book called Refuge Denied, which traces every survivor and loss of the St. Louis passengers. He doesn't trace anybody from England because they're in a separate category, never having been invaded by Nazi troops. But Scott Miller and Susan Ogilvy wrote this book, spent 5 years tracing all the passengers. So we have these stories. I'd like to share one with you in particular. My dear, dear friend, her name is Judy Steele, lives in Kew Gardens, Long Island. She was 4 years old on the ship. And she and her parents and her grandfather were passengers, and they were sent to France. While she was there, her grandfather passed. But then the Nazis were invading France. Her father took her to a remote area, held her hand, and pointed out a bird up in the tree, let go of her hand, and all of a sudden, someone else was holding her hand. Her father passed her off to a gentleman and his wife who became her pseudo-parents because her parents went to concentration camp and didn't survive. She was raised by what she called her mama, her French mother. After the war, her uncle in New York asked for her to come and stay with him. She didn't want to leave her mama. It's the only mother she knew. But they put her on a ship, sent her to New York, and she was raised by an aunt and uncle, who unfortunately didn't treat her very well. But in spite of that, she became a cantor and very, very active in the Jewish community. And she and I are very good friends. She is my sister that I never had. And each one of the survivors has a unique story of how they survived. And it is a miracle to listen to how they became. And ironically enough, every one of the survivors that I have met was extremely successful in the fields that they chose. Among them is a dentist, a radiology expert and teacher in Buffalo, New York, a judge in Chicago, a congressman in California, and all of these people became extremely successful in whatever field they chose. And it is remarkable. I think in spite of their ordeals, they were, I think, elevated to succeed.
To the extent you think of yourself this way, do you think of yourself as Polish or German, English, American, Jewish, some mix of those? Or did that change over time?
Jewish first, always. American. I find no affiliation with Germany or Poland at all. I was 8 years old when I came to America. This is my country. I chose it. I was an American citizen on my mother's papers, but after I got married, I chose to become an American citizen on my own papers. That was my choice. I'm grateful that we live in the greatest country in the world, and we have to keep it that way.
I've met many Holocaust survivors as I had taught this in another temple, and not one of them has any ill feelings about their life, and they are and were quite successful people, as you're mentioning as well too. But on the other side, my parents fled Europe, Poland, right before the war, and they never spoke about it at all. And my mother was always very angry. And she had a beautiful life here, raised 3 beautiful daughters, and she was angry because she had to leave Poland.
It's not unusual.
Have you ever heard that?
Absolutely.
You have.
Absolutely. And unfortunately, I have a very dear friend who left Poland with her mother and her aunt and hid under a train and ended up living with the Bielskis in the forest. She was 2 years old when she was with the Bielskis. I have also met the daughter of a Bielski sister who lives in Freehold. And she was put with a Catholic family. After the war, her parents came to retrieve her. She didn't want to leave. Her parents kidnapped her, literally. She had no idea who they were because she had been with the Catholic family since infancy. And this was a sister of the Bielski brothers. So there are a million stories. And it's not unusual for Holocaust survivors to have buried their memories so deeply that they did not want to share. They also didn't want their children to be affected by their memories. So until many of them finally decided it was important to share, their stories are lost.
Eva, I just wanted to ask, when did you start sharing your family story?
After The Voyage of the Damned film came out and people were talking about the significance of the St. Louis, I decided it was time for me to share my story.
Well, we really appreciate you sharing it with us and letting us carry on your family's legacy and remember all of those who were lost and all of our shared history together. So please, if we can have a round of applause for Eva. We're going to do a short memorial service in honor of Yom Hashoah. Do you want to stay
No,
right
I'll
there?
go down.
Or do you, okay.
Thank you. Yes, I can.
So as I mentioned, Holocaust Memorial, Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day, was on Monday this year. And I always think it's important for us to take time as a community to make sure that we're remembering and honoring the victims of the Holocaust and their stories as well. So the words will be on the screen, and there'll be a few responsive readings as we go. So let's read responsively for this one. Our spirit is God's light. As we look at these memorial lights, try to imagine 6 million candles, each one with the name of another Jew. They worked, studied, took walks, the ordinary things of life. They all were part of our people. We will never forget our people whose light was extinguished in the Holocaust. If all of you can help me by saying "we remember" at the beginning of each sentence, I'll read about these different people and groups, and then I'll light a memorial candle for each one. So I'll let you start. Pavel Friedman and the more than 1 million children who perished in the Holocaust. Anne Frank and the millions who tried to hide but were captured and killed by the Nazis. Hannah Senish and those who fought for their freedom. The righteous of the nations who risked and even lost their lives trying to save our people. The 6 million Jews who were martyred, may their memories always be for a blessing. All 12 million people who perished in the Holocaust. This was the last poem written by Hannah Senish. She was a paratrooper and a hero and a victim in the Holocaust. This was written in 1944, and let's read her words together. Blessed is the match consumed in kindling flame. Blessed is the flame that burns in the heart's secret places. Blessed is the heart with the strength to stop its own beating for honor's sake. Blessed is the match consumed in kindling flame. When a new child comes, everything seems strange to him. What, on the ground I have to lie? Eat black potatoes? No, not I. I've got to stay? It's dirty here. The floor, look, it's dirt, I fear. and I'm supposed to sleep on it? I'll get all dirty. Hear the sounds of shouting, cries, and oh so many flies. Everyone knows flies carry disease. Ooh, something bit me. Wasn't that a bed bug? Here in Terezin, life is hell, and when I'll go home again, I can't yet tell. Those words were written by Teddy, a child who was an occupant of Theresienstadt, one of the concentration camps, in 1943. And this poem was written by Pavel Friedman, also at Theresienstadt, on June 4th, 1942. It's from the book I Never Saw Another Butterfly, which we talked about in class this year in 7th grade. And you can see his artwork that accompanied the poem there as well. So let's read responsibly. I'll let you read the first paragraph. Such a yellow is carried lightly way up high. It went away, I'm sure, because it wished to kiss the world goodbye. That butterfly was the last one. Butterflies don't live in here, in the ghetto. These words were written by Franta Bass, also a child occupant of Theresienstadt, and it's entitled I Am a Jew, and let's read them together. I am a Jew and will be a Jew forever. Even if I should die from hunger, never will I submit. I will always fight for my people on my honor. I will never be ashamed of them. I give my word. I am proud of my people, how dignified they are. Even though I am suppressed, I will always come back to life. This passage is from the Diary of Anne Frank. That's the difficulty in these times. Ideals, dreams, and cherished hopes rise within us, only to meet the horrible truth and be shattered. It's really a wonder that I haven't dropped all my ideals because they seem so absurd and impossible to carry out. Yet I keep them because in spite of everything, I still believe that people are really good at heart. I simply can't build up my hopes on a foundation consisting of confusion, misery, and death. I see the world gradually being turned into a wilderness. I hear the ever-approaching thunder, which will destroy us too. I can feel the sufferings of millions, and yet, if I look up into the heavens, I think that it will all come right, that this cruelty too will end, and that peace and tranquility will return again. In the meantime, I must uphold my ideals, for perhaps the time will come when I shall be able to carry them out. As we move to the end of our service, we're going to say two prayers together. The first is El Malei Rachamim, which is a prayer that we say when people have passed away, usually at a funeral. And this is a special prayer in memory of the 6 million Jews who were killed in the Holocaust. So I'm going to ask everybody to rise as we say this prayer together, if you're able. And then after that, we'll say Kaddish together, and the words will be on the screen. But if you would like to look at a prayer book for the words of Kaddish, there's a prayer book underneath your seat, and the words will be on page 589, but they'll be on the screen as well. So let's read together a prayer in memory of the 6 million, El Malei Rachamim. God, full of compassion, grant perfect peace in your sheltering presence among the holy, to the souls of the men, women, and children of the house of Israel who were killed in the ghettos and concentration camps of the Shoah. May their memory endure from generation to generation for all time. Master of mercies, keep them under your protecting care. May their souls be bound up in the bonds of eternal life. Adonai is now their inheritance. May they rest in peace, and let us say, Amen. And let's together say Kaddish. We consecrate the memories of all those who lost their lives in the Holocaust, as together we are risen to recite the mourners' Kaddish together. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei rabbah, bi'alma divarach hirutei v'yamlich malchutei, b'chayachon u'v'yomechon, u'v'chayei dechol beit Yisrael, ba'agala u'v'zman kariv v'imru. Amen. Yehi Shmei Rabba Mivarach Le'olam U'almei Almaya Yitbarach V'yishtabach V'yitpa'ar V'yitromam V'yitnaseh V'yithadar V'yitaleh V'yithalal Shmei Dekudesha Barichu Le'ela Min Kol Birchata V'shirata Tushbechata V'nechemata Ta'amiran Be'alma V'imru Amen. Yehi Shlama Rabba Min Shemaya V'chaim Aleinu Ve'al Kol Yisrael V'imru Amen. Oseh Shalom Bimromav Hu Ya'aseh Shalom Aleinu Ve'al Kol Yisrael V'imru Amen. May the source of peace send peace to all who mourn and comfort to all who are bereaved, as together we say, Amen. Please be seated. And I'd like to conclude with a responsive reading that was written by an anonymous child, also at Theresienstadt in 1941, also from the book I Never Saw Another Butterfly. This is called Birdsong. He who doesn't know the world at all, who stays in his nest and doesn't go out, he doesn't know what birds know best, nor what I want to sing about, that the world is full of loveliness. Hey, try to open up your heart to beauty. Go to the woods someday and weave a wreath of memory there. Then, if the tears obscure your way, you'll know how wonderful it is to be alive. I really want to thank everyone for joining us this evening. It's so important to remember and so important to hear the stories of people who are still around to share them with us. Sorry. So Eva, thank you from the bottom of our hearts for sharing your story so beautifully so that we can carry it along into our futures and that our students can carry it along. And I really appreciate most of all your homework assignment for all of us. So students, it's not due next week. It's due in 20 years, she said. But take that to heart and really think about carrying on that legacy and the lessons that we've learned from this experience and from Eva sharing her story. So please, one more round of applause for Eva to be with us tonight. And thank you, everyone.